Rebecca. Written by Martin Hedgren with the assistance of ChatGPT. Chapter 1. The candle in Rebecca Nurse's cell had burned low, its glow shrinking to a thin amber oval on the dirt floor. She watched it quietly, hands folded in her lap, the way she had once folded them during evening prayers. Outside, late June's night air pressed through the cracks of the wooden jail, carrying the mingled scents of rain-soaked earth and horses tied outside. At 71 years old, Rebecca's body ached from the cold floorboards and the iron shackles that bruised her wrists. Yet her spirit remained unbroken. She had lived a long life. A life of tending fields, raising 8 children, praying faithfully, keeping peace with neighbors whenever peace was possible. Her soft voice and calm presence had once been enough to soothe quarrels and ease grief. But Salem Village was no longer a place where calm voices were heard. The witchcraft accusations had begun like a small brush fire, strange fits in girls, frightened whispers, suspicions cast like stones. And then the flames spread, fanned by fear, pride, petty disputes, and a belief that the devil walked among them. Rebecca had been astonished when the girls first cried out against her, accusing her of tormenting them with invisible specters. She had believed that the court would see and recognize the truth. She stood before the court on her trembling legs, her voice gentle but firm, and declared, "I am innocent." Many in the gallery wept to hear her say it. Even the first jury had acquitted her. And then the afflicted girls convulsed and wailed until the magistrate demanded the jury to reconsider, and by evening, she was condemned. Now she waited in a cell, waited for the dawn of July 19th, 1692, when she would be hanged on Gallows Hill. Near midnight, footsteps approached. Rebecca lifted her tired eyes as Deacon Turner stood at the bars of her cell, lantern in hand. His face was pale, drawn with worry. He had known her for decades, attended meetings with her, prayed beside her. Tonight, he looked older than she had ever seen him. "Mistress Nurse," he whispered, "are you awake?" "Sleep avoids me tonight," she answered gently. Turner hesitated before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The lantern glow softened the lines of his face, revealing not authority but fear. "There is still time to confess," he murmured. "If you would but admit you strayed into temptation, the court may show mercy." Rebecca shook her head. Her voice, though quiet, was firm. "I cannot stain my soul with a lie to save my life. I have walked in fear of the Lord these many years." The deacon's eyes glistened. "Some say the court has been misled. Some say Satan works not through the accused, but through the accusers themselves." Rebecca reached out and gently touched his arm. "If they are mistaken, God will judge with clearer eyes than ours." Turner bowed his head. "May he forgive us," he whispered. He stepped out of the cell, and as the door shut, Rebecca felt a warm certainty settle over her heart. She had spoken truth all her life. She would not abandon it now. Morning came gray and heavy, as though the sky itself mourned. Rebecca was led from her cell along with 4 other condemned women. Their names were Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Good, Sarah Wilds, and Susanna Martin, and she knew them all. The road to Gallows Hill was crowded with villagers, some grim, some curious, some grief-stricken. Among them, Rebecca saw her sons and daughters at a distance, their faces streaked with tears. She prayed silently that God would comfort them when she no longer could. The gallows stood stark against the pale sky. Rebecca climbed the steps with slow, steady breaths, leaning only slightly on the guard beside her. The rope hung waiting. Before it was placed around her neck, she turned her gaze toward the gathered crowd. Her voice, though frail, carried clearly across the hillside. "I am innocent and clear, and God knows it. I forgive you all." A murmur rippled through the onlookers, guilt, shock, sorrow. Even some of the afflicted girls lowered their eyes. The noose was tightened. The wind lifted her white cap, fluttering it like a small banner. The platform dropped. Rebecca's body swayed in the summer breeze, but her courage did not. And though Salem did not know it yet, this day would become a wound in its memory, a reminder of what blind fear can destroy, and what kind of grace a human soul can hold even at the edge of death. Years later, when the trials were condemned and restitution offered, her name would shine with honor again. Her descendants would speak it with pride. Her story would stand as a testimony, not of witchcraft, but of a woman's steadfast faith in the face of hysteria. Rebecca Nurse had died on Gallows Hill, but she had not died in shame. And Salem slowly and painfully would learn to remember her rightly. Chapter 2. Now we go back a few days after Rebecca had been accused. There was a court hearing. Speak the truth. Rebecca Nurse sat on a low wooden bench just outside the meeting house, waiting to be escorted back to the jail after another day of examinations. The sun was dipping behind the trees, turning the sky a pale, exhausted gold. Her bones ached from standing, from being questioned, from simply existing as a part of Salem's fevered imagination of witchcraft. As she rested, a small figure appeared at the corner of the building, walking slowly, hesitantly. It was Ann Putnam, Jr., one of the principal accusers, barely 12 years old. Rebecca straightened, her face softening despite her weariness. "Child," she said gently, "shouldn't you be at home?" And didn't answer at first. Her hands were clasped together, and she wrung them so tightly her knuckles whitened. I came to speak with you," and said. Her voice trembled, not with fear of demons, but with something far more human. Rebecca nodded. "Then speak," and approached, only a few steps, as if fear held her back from getting too close and guilt held her back from running away. "They say you sent your specter to pinch me," she whispered. "They say I screamed your name, even as you stood before us." "And what do you say, Ann?" Rebecca asked softly. The girl swallowed hard. Her eyes started toward the meeting house door, making sure no one watched. "I don't know what I saw," she blurted, tears suddenly filling her eyes. "Sometimes at night I hear voices, or I dream of shapes pressing on my chest, and when they ask me whose shape it was, I don't know. Sometimes the others cry out first, and I don't want to be the only one who says nothing. They'll think I'm hiding something, or that the devil tricks me." Rebecca's heart ached. She studied the girl's trembling hands, her frightened gaze, the weight of expectations and fear crushing a child. "And," she said, "you are young, and these are heavy matters for any soul, let alone one so tender. But you must listen carefully now," and sniffled, wiping her face. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "Speak the truth, no more, no less. Whether it brings you praise or scorn, speak only the truth." Anne's lower lip quivered. "But what if they don't believe me?" "Better to stand alone in truth," Rebecca said, "than join a crowd in falsehood." Anne looked up at her then, really looked. The old woman's calm eyes held no anger, no bitterness. Only grief and something like mercy. "And if I have wronged you?" Anne whispered. Rebecca reached out and touched the girl's hand, her own fingers thin and cool. "Then may God forgive you," she said gently. "As I already have." Anne's breath hitched. A tear slid down her cheek, landing on Rebecca's sleeve. But a moment later, voices rose from around the corner, women calling Anne's name sharply. Anne flinched. She jerked her hand away, stepping back into the safety of shadows. Her face changed with fear reasserting itself, like a mask she was forced to wear. I must go," she stammered, backing away. "I didn't speak to you. You mustn't tell them." "Go with God, child," Rebecca murmured, and hesitated, just long enough to look ashamed, then turned and ran toward the voices that governed her fate. Rebecca watched her disappear, a small soul lost in a tempest of adult fear and manipulation. A guard arrived moments later to escort her back to the jail. Rebecca rose, steadied herself, and walked without complaint. Behind her, The golden evening faded into the uneasy dark of Salem. Chapter 3. That same evening, Anne was bothered. Being only 12 years old and easily persuaded into believing things that did not really happen, well, something happened, or maybe not. The things I saw. And Putnam lay awake long after the candles had gone out, staring at the low rafters above her bed. The house was quiet, too quiet. Not even the cows in the pasture stirred, and the summer wind had died to a breathless stillness. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, but the warmth did nothing to ease the cold inside her. Rebecca Nurse's gentle voice kept replaying in her mind. Speak the truth, no more, no less. Anne squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force it away. But the words had settled deep, like a burr caught in the hem of her thoughts. From the next room came a soft creak, the familiar step of her mother, perhaps checking the shutters one last time. Or perhaps simply watching over her daughter, making sure no specter slipped in to trouble her sleep. Anne's parents had grown vigilant since the fits began, proud, frightened, determined that their daughter was chosen by heaven to reveal Satan's servants. Chosen. It had felt like a kind of power at first. When the other girls convulsed and shrieked, eyes rolling back, and felt swept into something larger than herself, belonging, purpose, importance. People listened to her. People feared her words. Adults, even magistrates, bent toward her trembling voice as though she were a prophet. But today Rebecca Nurse had called her child in a way no one had for months, and turned onto her side. Shadows moved gently along the wall as the moon peeked between clouds. The shadows looked almost like hands. Her breath caught. Not real. Not real. She clutched the blanket tighter. Sometimes she truly did feel something pressing, like a weight on her chest at night, a choking dread she couldn't name. Sometimes she dreamt of shapes standing over her bed, whispering her name. But other times she wasn't sure. Other times she screamed because the room was full of confusion, not demons. She thought about the meeting house that afternoon. She remembered Rebecca's frail hands folded before her, the lines of age and kindness etched into her face. She thought about how wrong it had felt to cry out against her and accuse her of witchcraft, even though the other girls wailed and thrashed. Rebecca had looked at her with no hatred. Not even fear. Just sadness. And forgiveness. The thought struck, and with a sharp ache, forgiveness for something she had not yet admitted doing. And pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. If she told the truth now, if she confessed uncertainty, or fear, or doubt, what would become of her? Would the girls turn on her? Would the village believe she was under the devil's influence? Would her parents turn against her since they were now important people in Salem because of her? She imagined her mother's face if she dared admit she might have been wrong. The disappointment, the terror, the confusion, and felt tears sting her eyes. The darkness at the foot of her bed thickened, and Anne gasped before she realized it was only the blanket sliding off the chair. Her heart pounded hard enough to hurt. I didn't mean to harm her, and whispered into the stillness. I didn't mean, but the words came out too soft, swallowed by the dark. Her guilt grew heavier with every minute. What if Rebecca was innocent? What if the court hanged her because of a frightened child? And curled into herself, trembling. The moon slipped behind a cloud again, plunging the room into deeper shadow. She wished someone would come and hold her, tell her that she was just a child, tell her she could stop all this if she wanted. But nobody came. They all expected her to be strong, stronger than her age, stronger than her fear. Rebecca Nurse's voice rose once more in her mind, quiet and unwavering. Better to stand alone in truth than join a crowd in falsehood. And covered her ears as if that might silence the memory. But it didn't. Tonight, the truth felt like a ghost more frightening than any she'd ever imagined. And Putnam lay awake until dawn, trapped between what she'd said and what she could never take back. Chapter 4. A child's eyes. Night settled thickly over the jailhouse in Salem, muting every sound except the distant rasp of crickets in the grass outside. Rebecca Nurse lay awake on the hard wooden pallet, her hands folded on her chest, her breath a soft rhythm in the darkness. The straw beneath her smelled of dust and time. The air was cool and damp, seeping through the cracks of the timber walls. Her bones ached, as they always did, but pain had long ago ceased to trouble her. Instead, she thought of Ann Putnam, Jr. That child's downcast eyes haunted her more than her own impending fate. Rebecca could still see the way Ann's small hands trembled, the way her voice wavered between fear and duty. The girl had stood before her like a candle caught between two drafts, pulled by truth in one direction and by expectation in the other. How could a child, 12 years old, bear the weight of a village's fear? Rebecca exhaled slowly. She had seen many kinds of fear in her lifetime. The fear of poor harvests. The fear of illness sweeping through families. The fear of losing a child to winter's bitterness. But this fear, the fear of unseen evil lurking among neighbors and kin, this was the most dangerous kind. It consumed good sense and devoured compassion. It turned children into accusers and grown men into executioners. What must Ann feel now alone in her bed? Was she afraid of demons or afraid of being wrong? Rebecca's heart softened. The Lord knows her heart, she thought, and He knows how heavily others have pressed upon it. She remembered the girl's whispered confession. Sometimes the others cry out first, and I don't want to be the only one who says nothing. Peer pressure. Loneliness. The terror of being different. These were forces as powerful as any specter the villagers imagined. Rebecca closed her eyes. She prayed, not for herself, but for Ann. Lord, let her heart seek the truth, she murmured. Spare her from the guilt that she is too young to bear. And forgive her, for she knows not the consequences of her words. The wind sighed through the narrow window slats, cool against her cheeks. She imagined Ann tossing in her bed, struggling with doubts she dared not speak aloud. A child caught in a storm she did not choose. Rebecca felt no anger toward her, only sorrow and a strange tenderness. For though Ann's words had condemned her, Rebecca recognized the innocence behind them. Misguided, yes, but not malicious. There is mercy in God's eyes, Rebecca reminded herself. And there must be mercy in mine. She turned her head toward the small glow of her fading candle. Its flame bent and flickered, fighting to stay alive. Much like the child who had accused her, wavering, fragile, desperate to be seen. I forgive you, and Rebecca whispered into the darkness. I pray one day you forgive yourself. The candle sputtered, dimmed, and finally winked out. Rebecca folded her hands beneath her cheek and let the darkness surround her, not with fear, but with peace. She had surrendered her fate to God. But her prayers, she knew, might still reach a frightened child struggling through the night. Chapter 5. The Morning Light. Dawn crept slowly into the Salem jail, soft and pale, as though it hesitated to touch the place where such sorrow lived. A faint blue-gray glow seeped through the slits of the wooden shutters, spreading across the dirt floor of Rebecca Nurse's cell. She had not slept. Rebecca rose with care, her joints stiff, her breath a little shallow from the night's chill. She straightened her cap and smoothed her apron as best she could. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. The world outside was beginning to stir. She could hear the sounds of horses, the low murmur of men preparing the carts, and the occasional clang of metal as guards readied their muskets. Today was July 19th, 1692. The day she would die. Rebecca placed a hand against the rough wooden wall and whispered a brief prayer, not for deliverance, for she knew that would not come, but for strength, for peace, for the hearts of those she loved. And for the children who had condemned her, though they scarcely understood the fires they had helped to fuel. Footsteps approached down the hallway, slow, respectful, almost reluctant. Deacon Turner appeared at her door again. His face was drawn, his eyes rimmed red, as though sleep had abandoned him as well. "Mistress Nurse," he said softly, "it is time." Rebecca nodded. "I am ready." He opened the cell door, and she stepped out with careful dignity. Her feet were bare on the cold earth, but she walked as if she wore her Sunday best. Rebecca Nurse was a woman who had carried herself with quiet strength all her life. She would not falter now at its end. As they walked toward the yard where the cart waited, Turner spoke in a low voice. "Your children are here," he murmured. "They stand at a distance, but they have not left you." Rebecca's chest tightened, not with fear, but with love so vast it ached. Outside, the early morning air was fresh, smelling faintly of wet grass and smoke from distant fires. The sun had not yet broken over the horizon, but its light glowed behind the tree line, a promise of a new day. Villagers gathered along the road, their faces somber, conflicted, or fearful. Some avoided her gaze, others watched her with tears in their eyes. A few bowed their heads as she passed. Rebecca stepped into the waiting cart with care, the boards creaking beneath her weight. She settled onto the rough plank seat, folding her hands in her lap. Her sons stood several yards away, held back by guards. Their faces were contorted with grief, eyes rimmed red, fists clenched as though they could hold on to her with will alone. Rebecca met their eyes with gentle calm. "Be at peace," she said softly. "We shall all meet again." The cart lurched forward. As it rattled up the uneven path toward Gallows Hill, birds began to sing faint morning songs. The sun, hesitating at the horizon, finally broke through, casting golden light across the fields she had once walked. Rebecca breathed deeply, letting the warmth of the new day rest on her lined face. She kept her gaze heavenward, her mind filled with psalms she had recited since girlhood. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Her hands did not shake. Her heart did not falter. Her spirit did not bend. When the cart reached the hilltop, she stepped down with the help of the guards. The gallows loomed stark against the rising sun, but Rebecca looked past it, towards the sky, vast and bright, untouched by human fear. Salem would remember this morning for generations. Chapter 6. The Moment She Knows. The news found and before dawn, carried not by a messenger, but by the hush that fell over the Putnam household like a wet cloth. She awoke to the low murmur of voices downstairs, her mother, her father, and the unmistakable tremor in their tones. And sat up in bed, heart already thudding, as if something inside her recognized what her ears had not yet heard. She crept halfway down the stairs and stopped when she saw her parents' faces, frozen, pale, solemn. Thomas Putnam's jaw was tight. Her mother's eyes glistened. "It is done," her father said quietly. This morning, at sunrise, Rebecca Nurse was hanged. A faint ringing filled Anne's ears. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if someone had untied a rope inside her chest, not loosening it, but snapping it free, and she felt herself falling inward. Rebecca Nurse, the old woman who had once patted her hand in church. The woman who had looked at her during the trial, not with hatred, but with bewilderment and a sorrow so gentle it had nearly undone and on the spot. Executed. Because of her. And dug her nails into the stair railing until her fingers were numb. She knew that her parents would forbid her from feeling anything other than righteousness, victory, duty fulfilled. But her heart hammered against her ribs with a different truth, one she had tried to silence for weeks. She had lied. Not entirely, the fits were real. The fear was real. But the words that followed, the certainty, the pointing finger, that part had come too easily. Like the adults had already carved the path and only needed the children to walk it. And backed up the stairs silently, her legs trembling so hard that she had to crawl the last few steps. When she reached her room, she closed the door and pressed her forehead to the cold wood. She wanted to pray, but every word felt poisoned. Instead, her mind replayed small, piercing images, Rebecca's fingers trembling as she gripped the railing in court, the confusion in her eyes when and had her fits, the whispered, "Child, why?" that and had pretended not to hear. Anne's stomach twisted so violently she thought she might get sick. She curled onto her bed, clutching her knees to her chest. The early morning light crept across the floorboards, pale and indifferent. She wondered whether Rebecca had forgiven her, or whether her soul now drifted through the trees outside, watching and waiting for her to speak the truth. But Anne stayed silent. Because even at 12 years old, she knew, some truths, once spoken, could burn a whole village to the ground. And yet, as the church bell tolled in the distance, slow, heavy, final, she felt the first ember of guilt settle in her chest, glowing painfully bright. It would not go out. Not for years. Not for decades. Not even when she finally asked Salem to hear her confession. It had begun here on this quiet morning with the knowledge that Rebecca Nurse was dead and that Ann Putnam had helped put her in the grave. And Putnam Jr.'s public confession in 1706, she was 26 years old. Chapter 7. The Confession. The church felt smaller then and remembered. Years had thinned the walls, or so it seemed. Every whispered draft slid over her skin like a question she could no longer avoid. She walked down the aisle slowly, her steps echoing against the wooden floor that had once trembled beneath her fits. Faces watched her with an uneasy, shifting curiosity, some familiar, some older, some new. A few held resentment against her, others quiet dread. But she was no longer 12 years old. She could not hide behind being a little girl now. Reverend Green stood near the pulpit, hands folded, gaze steady. He had agreed to let her speak, and drew a breath, though her lungs felt too small for honesty. When she faced the congregation, her hands shook. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the fragile quiver of someone who had carried guilt for half her life. She opened the parchment she had written and rewritten until the ink nearly tore the fibers apart. "Neighbors," she began, her voice barely more than a thread, "I come before you this day with a heavy heart and a sorrow that has long rested upon my spirit." A murmur passed through the room. Anne swallowed. "I was a child in the year of the great witchcraft delusion," she continued. "A child who, through ignorance and fear and the influence of others, was brought to accuse several innocent persons." Silence now. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Her voice wavered, but did not break. "And though my fits and afflictions were real, I truly believe, that Satan took advantage of my weaknesses, that he misled me to say things that were not of God, nor of truth." She paused. Her eyes lifted from the page and swept the room, and there, near the back, she saw the Nurse family. Silent, unmoving, the descendants of the woman she could never unhang. Anne's throat tightened. "It weighs heavy on my heart," she said, "especially that I fear I have been the innocent cause of the death of your dear mother, Rebecca Nurse." Gasps fluttered like startled birds, but no one rose. Anne stepped closer to the pulpit, her voice gaining a raw, shaking strength. "She was a woman of goodness, a woman whose gentleness I remember even now. I confess before God and this congregation that my accusations against her were false, and that the harm that befell her lies upon my conscience." Her vision blurred, but she forced herself on. "I beg you, all whom my words have wronged, to forgive me. I was misled. I was misguided. I was but a child, swept in a storm I did not understand. But the guilt has been mine. It has lived in me every day since." A tear slid down her cheek. "And I pray the Lord to forgive me likewise. For I am truly sorry." The last words left her like an exhale she had held for 14 years. The parchment trembled in her hands. She lowered it, feeling both lighter and more exposed than she had ever felt in her life. The room was so quiet she could hear the winter wind brushing the windows. Then she heard a sound, a stifled sob. She did not look to see whose it was, and bowed her head. Her confession, once spoken, could not change the past. It could not restore Rebecca Nurse. It could not undo the fear or the death or the madness that Salem had justified as righteousness. But as the congregation absorbed her words, something shifted, faint, fragile, and real. A beginning, a long-delayed one. The first small stirring of healing in a village that had once torn itself apart. And for Ann Putnam Jr., it was the first day she felt the weight of the noose around her own heart loosen, just a little. Chapter 8. Epilogue. The space between two voices. The years that followed Ann Putnam Jr.'s confession slipped into the soil of Salem like rain, steady, unremarkable, but reshaping the earth all the same. Rebecca Nurse's grave rested at the edge of what had once been her family's land. The stone, placed long after her death, bore simple words, "O Christian martyr." But the land felt her long before the carving appeared. Birds nested in the birches above her. The wind thinned as it passed the clearing, as if softening its voice in respect. And came here sometimes. Never openly. Never in daylight. Always at dusk, when the shadows lengthened enough that ghosts felt near but not threatening. She would stand at the edge of the clearing, hands clasped, eyes lowered, not expecting forgiveness, only hoping to be allowed to speak. "I remember your kindness," she whispered once, voice trembling into the twilight. "More than anything else, that is what haunts me." No answer came, not in words. But sometimes the wind shifted just slightly, as though the branches wished to ease the weight on her shoulders. Over time, Ann's visits grew less frequent. She had a household to manage, responsibilities, the quiet aches of adulthood. Yet the memory of Rebecca Nurse lived in her like a lantern, small, steady, flickering with lessons she could not have understood as a girl. Rebecca's family rebuilt their lives as best they could. Her sons kept her memory alive with quiet pride, not bitterness. Her daughters spoke her name in blessings. Her grandchildren grew up hearing stories of their gentle grandmother, wronged but unbroken. And in the strange alchemy of human hearts, Ann's confession, spoken decades after the rope had done its work, became part of that story too. Not an absolution, not a redemption, but a thread in the tapestry, acknowledging the wound so it might finally scar over. History would remember Salem for its hysteria, its fear, its injustice. But within those tangled roots grew two intertwined legacies. Rebecca Nurse, whose dignity endured cruelty, and Putnam Jr., whose remorse dared to speak when silence would have been easier. They had shared no peaceful moment in life. But in memory, the place where truth and regret finally meet, they walked closer than they ever had in 1692. And perhaps, in the gentle hush of that clearing, where birch leaves shivered like whispered prayers, the space between their two voices softened into something almost like understanding.